A nosy neighbor tried to call out on my landscaping crew, but what she didn't know, half of them were undercover federal agents. It all started on a quiet Monday morning. My crew and I had just arrived at a client's house in a peaceful tree-lined suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of place where the lawns are trimmed weekly, every mailbox looks the same, and residents wave politely but keep to themselves. The sun was barely up, birds were chirping, and we had a full day of landscaping ahead of us. We began like we always do, unloading our tools, chatting about the day's tasks, and mapping out the flower beds. One of the guys was laying out marker flags, while another was setting up soil bags near the driveway. About 15 minutes in, the neighborhood silence was broken by a voice that cracked through the morning like a whip. "You boys better pack it up, unless you want ice to show up." We all stopped mid-task and turned in disbelief toward the source of the shouting. First, I genuinely thought someone was kidding. But standing on the porch across the street was a woman, late 50s, maybe older, arms crossed, face tight with disapproval. She wore the classic suburban enforcer look. Oversized dark sunglasses, a trendy but overcompensating exercise outfit, and yes, the ultimate HOA accessory, a clipboard. I didn't recognize her, which was odd. I had worked in that neighborhood before. But there was no mistaking the vibe she gave off. This was an HOA Karen in full effect. Before we could say a word, she started marching across the street, her sandals slapping against the pavement like sirens. She headed straight for us, or more specifically me, the business owner. Her eyebrows were already raised in battle mode. "Who gave you permission to work here?" she demanded, not offering a hello, not even a name. "Do you have permits? Paperwork? Because I'm pretty sure you're not authorized." I kept my voice calm and professional. "Yes, ma'am. Everything is cleared with the homeowner. We're just doing a landscaping job." She sneered. "I bet you are. I don't want illegals working on this block. This is a respectable neighborhood. I'm giving you 5 minutes before I call IC." My team, 6 men in total, shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down, some rolled their eyes, and others just stared in stunned silence. We'd had people question us before, especially in affluent areas, but this was next level. She wasn't just rude. She was threatening federal intervention. But here's the part Karen didn't know. And this is where it gets good. The job we were on wasn't a typical landscaping gig. The homeowner we were working for wasn't just a regular client. He was a high-ranking officer for a federal law enforcement agency. Not someone who brags about it or even talks much, but definitely someone who takes security and protocol very seriously. Because of the nature of the project, and due to existing threats the homeowner had received in the past, part of the job included installing specific landscaping features that doubled as low-visibility security enhancements. It wasn't over-the-top spy movie stuff, but it required oversight from professionals. 3 of the 6 men on my team that day, they weren't landscapers at all. They were federal agents, personnel from the Department of Homeland Security, assigned to ensure the work was done safely and according to protocol. We had coordinated well in advance, and they were working undercover in civilian clothes to keep the situation low-key. So while Karen was ranting about ICE and threatening to clean up the neighborhood, she was literally talking to law enforcement agents, the very kind she thought she was calling in for backup. One of the agents, who I'll call Agent M, stepped forward calmly. No aggression, no flexing of power. He just wanted to defuse the situation. "Ma'am," he said firmly but politely, "we're performing authorized work on private property. You're currently trespassing and interfering." Karen froze. "Excuse me," she said, voice rising but with noticeably less confidence. Agent M reached into his jacket and carefully, deliberately presented his federal ID badge. "Ma'am," he repeated, this time more firmly, "you're threatening to involve a government agency against active federal employees. You need to step back and stop all documentation and confrontation immediately." Her jaw opened but no words came out. Her stance crumbled. It was as if she wanted to say something, anything, but every sentence died in her throat. The sunglasses couldn't hide her wide-eyed fear. One of my actual workers chuckled under his breath, and I had to shoot him a look to keep a straight face. Karen held up her phone like she didn't know whether to delete photos or pretend she wasn't filming. Then she glanced between me, the agents, and the house. I didn't know," she muttered. "You should have had badges or something. You can't blame me for being cautious." You can blame someone for being rude, I responded, still trying to defuse tensions. But thankfully no harm done. Karen didn't say another word. She backed up a few steps, shuffled across the lawn, and practically disappeared into her home like a ghost. Her clipboard bounced awkwardly in her hand as she made her escape. After a few minutes, the tension lifted. The agent shrugged it off like pros and we got back to work. But I couldn't stop shaking my head for the rest of the day at the surreal irony of it. Karen thought she was calling the law on the law. And let's just say, that day planted a whole new kind of seed in the neighborhood. I run a landscaping company, but we're not your average mow the lawn and trim the hedges crew. We occasionally get contracts that involve working with government agencies, especially when it comes to properties that require both regular maintenance and specialized security upgrades. These are sensitive jobs, things the average person might never know were even there. That day, we were at exactly one of those properties. The client, let's just say he wasn't your friendly neighborhood grandpa. He was a high-ranking federal law enforcement officer, someone with actual classified clearance, and a position that required discretion, diligence, and most importantly, security. We had already done several prep meetings with his department, gone through background checks, and agreed upon protocols. For this job, besides laying down soil and planting landscaping features, we were also installing a discreet barrier system hidden behind shrubs, something that would boost visual privacy and serve as an added layer of defense around the home. Because this wasn't just about making things look pretty. Due to prior threats and high-profile cases this officer had been involved with, the security upgrades had to be supervised. So, embedded among my landscaping team were 3 individuals you would never guess worked in law enforcement. Dressed in regular work clothes, hauling tools and pushing wheelbarrows, they blended in perfectly. But in reality, they were undercover agents from the Department of Homeland Security. Their mission was simple: supervise the work and ensure no security risks were introduced during construction. They weren't there as favors or as bodyguards. They were there officially with paperwork, clearance, and government IDs to back it up. Meanwhile, Karen, the woman from across the street, knew none of that. Instead of having a simple conversation like any reasonable neighbor might, she chose to jump straight to threats. With her sunglasses slightly crooked and her determination boiling over, she decided we were a problem in her neighborhood. No questions asked. No facts checked. Just an immediate assumption rooted in, let's be real, prejudice and power tripping. She pulled out her phone like it was a weapon, unlocking it with the speed of someone who had done this before. "I'm documenting this," she announced triumphantly, like she had this grand sense of civic duty. She walked up to the front of my truck and started snapping photos of the license plates. She zoomed in on every decal, took close-ups of the equipment, and even lifted her phone to catch the faces of the workers. One of the agents had to duck slightly as she practically shoved her phone in his direction. "I know what I'm looking at," she muttered to herself. "ICE will love this." One of the DES agents, Agent M, put down the unit he had been working on, wiped his hands calmly on a rag, and walked over to her with controlled confidence. He wasn't threatening, but there was a clear authority in his tone. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "may I ask why you're taking photos of federal workers performing an authorized task on private property?" Karen stopped mid-snap. You could actually see the moment her entire brain short-circuited. She squinted at him, possibly trying to figure out if this was a joke or some kind of bluff. "What do you mean federal?" she asked slowly, as if the concept was brand new to her. Agent M reached into a side pocket, pulled out a black leather ID wallet, and flipped it open so she could see his credentials. "Badge. Identification. The seal," he said again, this time slower and firmer. "We are with the Department of Homeland Security. This is a sanctioned operation on behalf of a high-level government official. What you're doing right now could be viewed as interference." The look on Karen's face? Priceless. It was as if someone told her that all her HOA privileges were being revoked in real time. Her eyes widened behind the dark lenses, and she stumbled back half a step. Her face drained of color. You could almost see the gears turning in her head as she processed what had just happened. Here she was, assuming we were undocumented workers, about to call IC like it was some badge of honor, only to learn that the illegals she was yelling at were, in fact, actual federal agents. Karen quickly tried to backpedal. "Oh, I didn't realize. No one said anything. I thought you were just guys doing yard work." I didn't mean any harm. Just looking out for the neighborhood. But the damage was done. She had made assumptions based on appearances and acted with full force without knowing a single fact. She didn't ask who we were. She didn't knock on the homeowner's door. She went from concerned citizen to someone dangerously close to interfering with a federal operation. Agent M remained professional. Going forward, please refrain from taking unauthorized photos or engaging the team. If you have concerns, speak with the homeowner or contact local authorities, not immigration enforcement. Karen nodded quickly, mumbled some sort of apology that didn't quite land, and turned right around. This time she didn't march away with pride. She slinked off, defeated, stuffing her phone into her pocket like it had betrayed her. You could say justice didn't need a courtroom that day. Came with a badge and a rake in one hand. Karen froze in place. It was as if someone had hit a switch, and the energy she'd stormed in with disappeared in a blink. Just moments earlier she was full of confidence. Voice raised, finger pointing, phone in hand, proudly announcing her intent to call a self-proclaimed guardian of the neighborhood, determined to take action. But now? Her eyes darted nervously from face to face. The color visibly drained from her cheeks. You could almost feel the panic creeping in. I didn't know, she stammered, her voice suddenly a few pitches higher. No one told me. I just assumed you were, workers. Agent M tilted his head slightly, calmly brushing off his hands like he'd done this dozens of times before. We are workers, he replied coolly, his tone smooth, as if he wasn't the least bit surprised by her assumption. We're just not who you thought we were. Karen blinked, clearly unsure what to say next. Gone was the steady, accusatory tone from before. She was grasping now, looking for an excuse to cover what had already become a situation spiraling far out of her control. I'm just trying to keep the neighborhood safe, she offered weakly. We don't want any, problems around here. I thought you might be. Her voice trailed off. She didn't have the courage to finish that sentence, because in her heart she knew exactly what she thought. That thought, the assumption that a group of Latino men with shovels and rakes didn't belong in a high-end neighborhood, was what got her into this mess. Then, as if on cue, the front door of the house opened. Everyone, even Karen, shifted their attention to the man now stepping calmly onto the walkway. The homeowner. He was someone who didn't speak much, didn't have time for drama, and certainly didn't entertain nonsense. Tall, composed, with unmistakable authority in his posture, he had clearly heard enough from inside. Maybe the shouting, maybe the mention of ICE, or maybe the part where his authorized security operation became someone else's battleground. He walked straight toward us, locked eyes with Karen, and came to a stop only a few feet away. Ma'am, he said firmly, I'm the one who hired every person here today. This team was sent here to work on elements of private security and landscaping that are protected under federal jurisdiction. Karen didn't respond. She clutched her clipboard tight against her chest, as if it might shield her from the verbal lashing she could feel coming. You just attempted to call a federal agency, he continued, on federal agents, working under official authorization, on my property, for a project that involves national security. Do you understand how serious that could be? Her face went from pale to crimson in an instant. Her mouth opened, to apologize, to deflect, to explain, but nothing came out. She instead muttered a single desperate sentence. I was just going to call the HO. Silence followed. Even the agents, who had remained calm and composed through the ordeal, looked at each other in half disbelief and half amusement. Karen stood there awkwardly for a moment longer, looking like a balloon that had just been popped. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and began walking away. It was far from the stormy strut she came in with. No clipboard held high, no proud warnings shouted across the lawn, just a silent retreat down the sidewalk, head low, feet shuffling in grass-stained sandals. And right there, lying forgotten on the edge of the homeowner's property, was her precious clipboard. It had slipped from her grip during all the commotion. At first I thought she'd stop and go back for it, but she didn't. She just kept walking, disappearing behind her neatly trimmed hedges like a character fading out of a scene she no longer belonged in. Agent M gave a slight sigh and walked over to pick up the clipboard. He looked at it, gave a half laugh and handed it to me. Maybe she'll think twice next time, he said. casually returning to the task we'd started that morning. The rest of the day went on without interruption. No more shouting from across the street. No HOA reps with questions. Just the sound of rakes on gravel, shovels turning soil, and quiet murmurs of work being completed. The homeowner thanked us, the agent signed off, and the job was wrapped up smoothly. But it wasn't a day we were likely to forget anytime soon. Because sometimes all it takes to expose someone's true colors is a badge. Later that afternoon, with the sun starting to dip and the last touches of mulch being laid around the freshly planted rose bushes, a white SUV rolled up quietly beside the curb. Nothing flashy, no police lights or government logos, just a clean vehicle with a serious-looking older gentleman stepping out, holding a folder. At first, I assumed it might be a neighbor coming to ask about the plants or maybe someone from the city. But the moment he walked up and introduced himself, it became clear who he was. "Good afternoon," he said, offering a handshake. "I'm the HOA representative for this neighborhood. I heard there was an incident earlier today." He wasn't there to complain about noise or the tools on the sidewalk or even the work we'd done. No passive-aggressive comments. No demands for permits or paperwork. He was there to do something almost unheard of when it comes to homeowner associations: apologize. "I want to personally say I'm sorry for what you and your team experienced earlier," he said. "That confrontation should never have happened." I nodded cautiously, not knowing what angle he was coming from. He went on to explain that Karen, yes, she of the infamous clipboard, had something of a reputation in the neighborhood. Turns out, this wasn't her first encounter of the obnoxious variety. In fact, the HOA had received complaints about her more than once. Residents who felt she crossed the line, acted on personal bias, and injected herself into situations where she had no legal right to interfere. "She has no real authority," the rep clarified. "She's not an official HOA officer. She volunteers as part of our neighborhood watch patrol, but that doesn't give her any power to confront workers, guests, or homeowners." The kicker? She had already been warned before. Multiple times, in fact. Letters had been sent. Verbal reminders had been given. Residents had voiced concerns. But like clockwork, Karen always popped up again, clipboard in hand, issuing orders around the community like she was captain of a ship no one ever asked her to steer. But this incident? It was different. This time, her accusations weren't just offensive. They could have crossed into criminal territory. The HOA rep glanced around, lowered his voice slightly, and leaned in. What she did, taking photos, threatening to call IC, harassing law enforcement agents on duty, those actions could easily be viewed as obstruction of justice. That's a federal offense, especially when directed at personnel involved in national security operations. Even though the agents hadn't pressed charges, he said, the HOA was taking this matter seriously. "She won't be representing our organization in any capacity moving forward. We'll be formally removing her from any volunteer roles, including the neighborhood watch group she, often brags about." That last part made me chuckle a little. If you'd seen her earlier in the day, clipboard clutched in iron hands, tone sharp with superiority, you'd never guess she wasn't actually in charge of anything. In the end, the agents chose not to escalate things. True professionals. They easily could have responded very differently, but they preferred peace over punishment, a quiet resolution instead of a media-worthy blow-up. And that decision honestly speaks volumes about their character. Still, that didn't mean Karen walked away unscathed. Over the next few days, as we returned to the property to finish up minor touches, we spotted her a few times. Always from a distance. And every single time, she ducked away the moment she realized we were there. Once, she was walking her little dog, and literally yanked it by the leash into her house the moment one of the federal agents stepped out of his truck. Another time, I caught her peeking through the blinds, only to drop them the moment she locked eyes with one of my crew. It was like fortifying a house against a ghost. Except the ghosts were just guys with shovels and ace badges. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. There she was, someone who had puffed her chest and claimed to be protecting the neighborhood from so-called outsiders, now hiding in her own home, afraid to face the people she wrongly accused. It's funny how quickly confidence collapses when faced with truth. And maybe that's the lesson in all this. That judging people based on assumptions can backfire spectacularly. That the people you're suspicious of might be the very ones sworn to protect your well-being. That your attempt at control can turn into catastrophe when basic respect and decency are left behind. As for Karen, maybe this was her wake-up call. Or maybe it wasn't. Either way, one thing was clear as we packed up our tools that day. She wouldn't be peeking over her hedges anytime soon. This whole experience taught me something far deeper than just the importance of staying calm under pressure. Sure, keeping your cool when someone's yelling in your face is a valuable skill, especially when your crew is being accused of something as serious as being undocumented workers. But what truly stood out to me was how quickly things can escalate when people act on assumptions, stereotypes, and fear, instead of simply asking questions or seeking the truth. Karen never took the time to ask who we were. She never walked over to talk with the homeowner. She didn't observe, inquire, or even greet us like a reasonable adult. She saw brown-skinned men unloading tools from a truck, tools like shovels, rakes, wheelbarrows, and assumed that we were illegal laborers working without authorization in her neighborhood. She decided in that moment that we didn't belong, based purely on appearance and nothing else. That kind of thinking isn't just rude or ignorant, it's dangerous. Because in her attempt to protect something that didn't need protecting, she created a potential conflict involving law enforcement, federal workers, and a situation that could have had legal consequences. What if the agents hadn't handled it with such composure? What if the homeowner had taken offense and escalated it to court? What if someone on my crew had reacted emotionally, as anyone might when being threatened with immigration authorities for no reason? It was a vivid reminder of the real-world impact of prejudice and unchecked entitlement. Karen wasn't acting on facts. She was acting on a fabricated narrative she had created in her head, that outsiders were intruding in her space. And the irony? It couldn't have been stronger if it was written in a Hollywood script. The very agency she thought would rush to her rescue, ICE Immigration Enforcement, was already there. They were the very people she was preparing to call. The men she photographed, threatened, and tried to report were, in reality, officers from the Department of Homeland Security, working on behalf of another high-ranking federal official. She wasn't warning us about the law, she was challenging it. That moment when Agent M flashed his badge, when she realized the full weight of her mistake, you could feel the air get pulled right out of her. Her falsely assumed authority crumbled the second real authority stood in front of her. In Karen's mind, she had power. But in reality, she had none. And that realization unsettled her more than anything else. For the rest of the week, as we wrapped up our project, Karen practically vanished from sight. She didn't return to question us again. No more strolls with the clipboard. No more veiled comments across the yard. Whenever we caught a glimpse of her, it was through blinds or behind a curtain. She no longer wanted to be seen, not by us, and definitely not by the homeowner whose trust she nearly betrayed. But here's the thing. This wasn't about punishing her. It wasn't about getting revenge or showing her up. It was a lesson, one I hope she genuinely took to heart. Because every day around the country, people get judged unfairly for how they look, how they speak, or what work they do. And not everyone has the protection of a federal badge to back them up when those judgments come crashing down. If there's one message I hope someone takes away from this story, it's this. Always ask before you accuse. Always check your facts before you make assumptions. That stranger in your neighborhood might be a gardener, yes, but they could also be a federal agent, a veteran, parent, a citizen doing honest work. You never know who someone really is based solely on how they look or the job they're doing. Because at the end of the day, uniforms don't always come with badges. And the people who keep us safe, serve our country, or simply contribute to our community might not look the way you imagine. And as for Karen, well, rumor has it she's been officially prohibited from participating in any HOA volunteer roles for the rest of the year. No more patrols. No more clipboard. No more pretending to run the neighborhood. After enough complaints and, of course, the federal incident, the HOA finally stepped in and drew the line. There was no public scandal. No dramatic encounter. Just a quiet decision handed down that stripped her of the imagined power she had been wielding for far too long. Sometimes karma doesn't come loudly. It doesn't show up with sirens or flashing lights. Sometimes karma just shows up holding a clipboard, then quietly leaves it behind in the grass. If you enjoyed this crazy true story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss the wildest stories from the suburbs and beyond.